Okay, welcome to the Evolvepreneur Podcast Channel. Our very special guest today is Jan, who's an entrepreneur from the UK and has got a few decades of micro and small business behind her. So welcome, Jan, to the show.
John, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm very excited about it.
Cool. So I was going to dig into your bio a little bit and then we'll get into some questions if you like. So you're very familiar with the challenges that go on with starting a small business. And it says here that you started one from your kitchen table, which is usually what people do, either their kitchen table or their garage. As a single mother that turned into a multi-million-dollar turnover business, Jan has put her entrepreneurial experience together with a passion to writing a book, which we can talk about. And the book's called Scale for Success, which is now out in the UK from Bloomsbury in hardback and Kindle from early July publication in the US and Australia. So welcome again, Jan, to the show. It's very interesting to talk to you about scaling because it's one of my personal favourites.
Thank you, John. It's become one of my obsessions in life. I think I live and breathe scaling and the problems and advantages mixed there are of both.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the trouble, I think in some respects too, with scaling is that you end up in a situation where some people can't scale for lots of reasons, and sometimes they end up in a situation where that scaling can actually do more harm than good, right?
Oh yeah, it's talking absolutely out of my book on. We're so on the same page, John. I couldn't agree more. Scaling can do enormous harm, which you never think about. It's become the thing to do. Big is better, and of course you're absolutely right. It's not necessarily. I could tell you if I can take a couple of moments, my own experiences on it, because I had, as you rightly say, I grew this business from kitchen table, and then it got to a stage of being a small factory. And I had, I guess, about 15, 16 people. Very nice little business. We were flat out busy, had more sales than we could cope with. And to be honest, we were making a really, really nice profit, So everything, you'd think everything couldn't be better. But we had this one problem that we kept on having to turn clients away because we just couldn't fit any more work in. And so the factory opposite us across the car park became empty. And it seemed to me, in my very ignorant way, because I didn't have any training at all in business, I don't know if it would have stopped me if I had, but ignorant I was. So, one empty building opposite seemed, easy solution. You get double the people, push the furniture across the road, and hope we don't get run over. But apart from that, well, yeah, it's a minor detail, but so we'll have twice for people, twice for work, happy clients, and twice this lovely amount of money flowing in. And it sounds so simple put like that, doesn't it? Logic says that's absolutely the right thing to do. And it wasn't at all, because it was actually a disaster, to not too fine a point on it, because we literally doubled in turnover in size overnight, and we went from about 15 odd people to 43, I think.
And so they reckon the trigger is 22 people, because I went through that. I went to 23 people, and as soon as I got 23 people, everything changed.
It does, doesn't it? People don't think, and there doesn't seem to be a logic on paper why it should be a drastic change, but it does. It changes the whole nature of the thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you had more sense than I did, but we were just chucking people at the problem all the time. Thank you for that. I can see you're shaking your head, but we were just chucking people and thinking, more people is the answer because we're not coping. Which, of course, again, was totally wrong. We were just putting up the salary bill and not solving up the problems. That just meant more people were standing around, not knowing what to do, not getting the right direction, not having the systems put in to support it. And so my lovely little business with a substantial profit went into this disastrous nosediving horror of eating up the past year's profits with more speed than
Speed good.
giant bear,
Wow.
and yet it looks so logical on paper, but But no, it can be the quickest way to ruin a business if you do it wrong, scaling, I think, than anything.
Absolutely. I think that sort of thing happened to me when I was running an accounting software company. We had 100 square meters, and
Yeah.
we had 50 square meters or something. We moved next door to 100 square meters, and then about after we'd done the whole fit out, spent all the money on it, we got this letter under our door over Easter, and it said basically you're evicted because we've decided to sell the building and you got a month
Wow.
to get out. But I said, I just signed a lease. It says, well, the lease has a demolition clause. You know, when we have this demolition clause that we can pull. So basically it was like, oh, now we're homeless and we're going to get out quick. And we just spent $20,000 on this fit out to get our new premises up and running. So we had to move next door to another building because all the buildings in the area had demolition clauses. But they were trying to get people in the building. Building was vacant. So they said, yeah, you can come in really cheap. So we got 350 square meters, really cheap. But what happened was over the next 5 years, the increases in the rent, annual increases, we went from $5,000 a month to $13,500 a month in rent.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the business went through this whole growth stage because we had more room. I managed to jump off a ladder and crack 3 ribs on the way through, so that was real good fun as well.
No.
There's a whole story in itself. But what happened is we scaled and we were doing really well, but then we had an opportunity to merge with another company, and it ended up being a big mistake because what I found was that partners are not good fun. When you like scaling's another way of doing it, right? You get into a partnership, you think, oh, I can scale, we'll double our business. Same business as us, just sold the other side, so it made a lot of logical sense. But the partner that I joined with was so lazy that he wouldn't spend he would actually go home at 5 o'clock. And it's become I actually did a podcast interview with a guy because I think it's the worst investment mistakes you've ever made. And I did this whole podcast with him on it, interview. So I've never done that kind of thing before. I've never talked about it actually before. But the whole thing was that it looked really on paper, let's just say on paper it looked right. It looked illogical. What I didn't do was the old rose-coloured glasses thing. I looked at it, but I didn't look in it deep enough logically and say, where's the money? Why is this guy's financial? Where's his financials? Why isn't his financials don't look the way it should look? You know, what are hidden things because I didn't know how to look. Yeah. So in the end, it cost me like $1 million. And so, you know, it is dangerous because like you say, on paper it looks good, looks logical, but is it? Right? Is it really going to work out that way?
Absolutely, and that's fascinating. Actually, I remember, but you know, very very early stages. I was buying in stuff still rather than making it myself, and I dealt with a tiny little partnership out in the country of two woodworkers who were making the business, and they both got married. They were sort of quite set in their ways, traditional woodworkers, you know, almost your stereotype craftsmen, and their wives hated each other instantaneously. And so what was a very happy partnership and had been for 30 odd years or whatever it was, 20 odd years probably, suddenly ended up, as you say, this animosity. And one of them went incredibly lazy, stopped coming to work. The other one was working till midnight. But being a partnership, it was a nightmare to get out of. And that is the problem with partnerships, isn't it? You know, they can be hugely expensive to get out of. Well, and it really put me off.
I paid this guy a lot of money. We're talking, I think, well over $500,000 to get out. And I paid him off over 5 years or something because it was paid out of current profits. And then we 2 years later, we didn't have a business. So it's like, you know, at the end of the day, like, what looks like today doesn't mean what will happen tomorrow, I think. And that's the danger of that. So what's the secret to scaling then? Like if that's a disaster and what you do, is there questions you should be asking yourself? What do you think is the real way to go about it? And I guess there's also two scales too, because you can be busy and think, like you said, like grow your business and double the size and you can do more. But if you don't have the right systems in place and the right processes, then you get into trouble, right?
Yeah. I mean, certainly you can. And of course, you can do all that bit right, and then you can get the market judgment wrong, and then you've got everything bar the sales. But those are the sort of things that can go wrong if you're approaching scaling. But the more I've come to look at it, the more I think there is a lot of illusion about this business of scaling and growing a business, particularly for a small business. I think bigger entrepreneurs who have gone into it with a lot of research and knowledge and spent a lot of time preparing, possibly do know more about what they're doing. And what they do is they go in to build a business with a view to sell it.
Regardless
and actually, I think, sorry, John.
Regardless whether you're going to sell it or not, right? That's your view.
And I actually think that more small businesses should look at things like that. Because, if they looked at growth in a whole different way, we fall into this trap of growth means bigger premises, more people, more of everything. But we forget about more profit.
Yes.
Which is a little bit of a disadvantage. And we forget about the key thing to business, and it is building value of the business. And I think people ought to go into business thinking they're creating a business asset that is valuable from day one, even a small business. And rather than thinking they're going into business to grow something and chuck up jobs and chuck up headaches, because that's what happens, and if you do that, you end up with a business that owns you.
Yes.
And all those dreams of freedom and loads of money and wonderful things go slap out the window, and instead you're stuck in this misery. It's not like a job. You can't pack it up and you can't walk away.
No, but handling the baby, right? I mean, I went through that process when we went from like 7 staff to 23, 30, nearly 25 staff back to 5 staff.
Yeah.
Period of about a 7-year period, and it's very difficult to grow, shrink, and come back and then survive. And I think that's the danger, is that if you don't set that up right to be able to make the profits in the way through, then you end up holding the baby, right? I ended up holding the baby. I think I owed the tax office like $500,000 in the end of that, and I had to pay it back myself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, my business was one. In the end, after all of that, I was a business of one. Me.
I think that has a lot going to it. You're much more likely to get the freedom there, if you're a small business. Yeah, exactly.
I had a staff member after a while, like my son now works for me, and I think about 2 years ago, a year ago, we made more money in that year on just the two of us than I made with 23 staff.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, John.
Yeah.
And, so why are we all under this delusion it's the right thing to do? Of course it is for some businesses, but, everybody thinks that they should do it. And it's so not the case. And there's this mystique about business value that people think, oh, it's maths, I can't do it, or it's my accountant's job, or whatever. And they don't want to go there. They don't want to understand what their business is worth. And yet it should be absolutely what you're looking at all the time. And it should be part of, I believe it should be part of an exercise that you carry out on a regular basis. Why do people have businesses and not be able to read a balance sheet? I don't get it.
I had a conversation today. I actually interviewed a CPA accountant. He's an entrepreneur and also happens to be a CPA. And we talked about that on the show, talking about the fact that he said a lot of people, they think once they get bigger, they'll worry about financials, that when they're small, they don't need to worry about it. And so they get out of the habit of even looking at them. So when they get bigger, it just gets out of control. Like it's not something that they're built as a habit.
Absolutely. And and it's just crazy. I mean, you wouldn't, get a house and not know what its value was, or any other asset. And yet here's what we pitch in all our hours that we can breathe into, with no idea of whether we're actually creating any value or not. And as a sellable asset, it's just crazy.
What I actually do now is, if I can't scale, if you don't want to scale, double your prices.
Yeah, that's one thing to do. Yeah,
and it works. If you can sell your same service at double the price, then you get better at sales.
Absolutely.
Like a high ticket item, if you can sell it at a higher price, then basically that means that difference that you just made is best money you'll ever make.
I couldn't agree more. And I love the way you talk about sales too, John, because I think sales is so underrated as a skill.
Yes.
We've got all the marketing boys coming in and saying you don't need sales anymore. And sales is just crucial. You have to understand why people buy and what value is and, all those things if you're going to run a business.
Yeah,
It's
and I think
old-fashioned stuff.
it is, isn't it? Like, it's quite interesting because we're launching our own platform that we wrote an all-in-one platform. And one of the things I did when I had a look around to all the competitors, if you like, is that none of them have any sales teams. So basically you go there, you sign up for a trial, and you basically decide to buy it yourself, and then it goes through a process of whatever they've set up because they've avoided it. They've avoided that that actual sales conversation. The higher ticket items, yes, they do, typically have a salesperson in there because you can't sell a $15,000 package probably, over the internet. But that lower ticket item, it's almost like they've got to a point where they don't want to talk to you at all. And I think that's a mistake because you spend all that time and money to get that person to the website, and now you're basically making them do all the work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all sort of supposedly smoothing the customer journey, but I think that there's this poor image of sales, which is understandable because it used to be so badly done. But, I think it's a really necessary part of business function. And you certainly can't have a B2B company without a resilient sales force.
Absolutely. And I think that the other term is it's got to be repeatable. Like I'm going through the process now looking at how we can replicate our sales process that I do, because at the end of the day, I have to be able to, someone else has to do it. And I think the biggest problem is if someone else can't present the way you present, then you haven't done a very good job of documenting it. And so you end up in a situation where you have to let them say whatever they're going to say. And then that's usually when what we found went wrong. Like if the salesperson wasn't saying off the same songbook as you were coming off, they'd be promising things that they couldn't promise. And the whole thing would become a disaster because all the clients you get are not the clients you normally would get, right? So you end up in a hell clients that you promised all these things for, that the sales guy didn't understand what he was selling because you didn't teach him well enough at the start.
I recognise that one well. That was another casualty when we doubled in size because, of course, we had to double the sales force. And we were selling standard furniture and bespoke furniture made to order. And, trying to get, a cabinet maker might know how to make a piece of furniture or whatever, but somebody who sells in an office is not necessarily going to, particularly in a country town where we were. And, so exactly that. They were selling, saying, absolutely, of course you can have this three-legged table, when in reality it wouldn't stand up, And
it's interesting, isn't it? Like, even if you look at retail, like there's a company in Australia called Harvey Norman, which is a large retailing company. They just rent space, really, because they basically set up furniture. They're a furniture company, they're electronics, but I go there because the salespeople I speak to know what they're talking about. A lot of these retail environments where you go to, you talk to them, they have no clue they're just a shop assistant that has never been trained on anything. And you look at it and think that their system of way that they've done that these people have been trained properly and continue to get trained because they're training their sales team to actually understand what the products are. And it's bizarre, but I remember I went into, I think Coles or Myers or something like that in a couple of years ago, and I was looking at buying some sort of electric device or cooking device. And he said to me, I said, "What is the difference between one and the other?" He says, "Oh, just Google it," and walked away from me. Right? And it's like, dude, I didn't come in here to Google. I got to Google outside, right? And it's like that was his attitude because he had no clue about what the differences of the products were. And that kind of attitude is, I'm here, but I'm not really here. I'm just taking up space in here and not really selling anything because I don't want to bother to learn anything about it or have never been trained. This is a big business. Like, this is one of the major retail stores, so it's not like they don't have staff training, I wouldn't think.
I know, absolutely right. I can't remember who it was, but somebody telling me that they went in to an electronics retailer and, I can't remember what they wanted, but it was quite a high ticket item. And they were chatting to the salesperson and getting, quite excited, and they were quite a way down the decision line. And they said to her, well, could you get it out of the cabinet so that I can have a look? And she said, no, that's against the rules. And he said, well, if I'm going to buy it, I need to actually look at it. And, she said, no, sorry, it's against the rules. And that was it. He walked out, totally lost the sale. They are so constricted, aren't they, in retail now, in training, as to what they allow their people to do. And it just loses them sales over and over again. Crazy.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem, I think, is that in some respects, and I think the COVID hasn't helped this, is that people talk to other people in that interaction that happens. And even like my son's generation, they don't want to talk to anybody, right? They just want to talk to them on text, and so they actually don't want to have a phone conversation. In fact, they struggle with the phone. And it's like, you get to that point, then, you're going to have a lot of people that aren't going to... I mean, there's a certain percentage of people outgoing that's going to get away from that, and they're going to want to talk to people. But if you can't talk to someone, you're always going to have that disconnect. And I think offering that as a part of your offer, in that you can actually talk to someone, I think stands you apart from your competitors, probably for starters. I reckon if you went and look at after in any sort of entrepreneurial kind of venture, look at your competitors, you probably find most of them don't talk to their customers at all.
I absolutely agree. And interestingly, there's an American entrepreneur who I spoke to in research for my book called Matt Sweetwood. I don't know if you've come across him, but he's an author as well. And he had a photographic store, which he wanted to grow fast for various reasons. And he replaced all his retail stuff, exactly what you're saying, with people who were simply passionate about photography. So when they talked to customers, they knew the cameras, and they could talk with the pure passion from one ardent camera lover or photography lover, perhaps, to another. And of course, they cleaned up. They made a fantastic success. It grew to the biggest camera store in America, I think.
There's actually there's a company called JB Hi-Fi, and we go there, and there's one of the guys that served there. I've seen him a few times. He looks like he's straight out of The Hobbit. Like, this guy's got long hair. He does not look like he belongs there at all. But the guy knows his stuff. Like, you just know looking at him, right? You just know this guy's, because he's sitting in the Xbox gaming area, right? So he's a gamer. You can tell. And so you go and ask. So everybody's asking him questions, right? But he doesn't look like he belongs. Like, he's not. He's untidy. I don't think he'd be smelling anything, but he just looks untidy. And you think, this guy's like, he hasn't had a haircut in 10 years. It's like, the guy probably sells more than anybody else in that shop, I reckon, because people would say, you look like you know what you're talking about.
And I think that's the secret. People do want to be sold to some extent. We're all sold to in every walk of life, in every moment of life, but they want somebody authentic to do it. They don't want anything fake in sales anymore. They see straight through it. But talking to somebody with the same passion as you, then you can get excited about what you're buying, which is what you want to do. If you're spending your hard-earned cash, it's a big thing for all of us to make a purchase.
Yeah, particularly big ticket items where you feel like your buyer's remorse kicks in pretty quick afterwards.
Absolutely.
My previous business partner, which cost me a lot of money, he part of the money was his Porsche payment. And so he went to the shops apparently one day to get a new tyre for his car and came back with a Porsche. And so you can see that. And I ended up paying that Porsche payment for about 3 years. Like, that was fun.
You must have looked at that and not been very happy.
Wasn't happy. Because, so the funny thing about that it's very interesting, the partnership environment, right? When I looked at he said to me, I must get at least 10 grand a month out of the business to pay for my Porsche payment and all this stuff. And I go, okay then, well, if you're taking 10 grand, I'm taking 10 grand.
Straight for my scene.
Yeah, so I just gave myself a nice little pay increase there. We're talking really not 20 years, maybe 10, 15 years ago now. So that's a decent pay rise, right?
Yeah.
And at the time, the business could cope with it, but over time it got harder. And I think that was a mistake in terms of saying, well, you're taking this amount of money because you want it, but could the business support it? And ultimately, it wasn't worth 10 grand a month anyway. But you know what I mean? Like, it didn't ever earned it. So I think there's a danger in partnerships when you get to the point where, like you said, one partner's not working very well, and it's always the way I've found. You always find one partner works really hard, and the other partner, slackens off, and then the animosity builds up, and eventually it fails because, but the other partner could be bringing all the money in, but he's not seen to do that. So it's like it could be a two-way street sometimes.
I'm sure. Like I say, I having seen those two warring woodworkers at such an early stage in my business career, it put me off partnerships forever. It was one of the mistakes I didn't make, and goodness knows there are not a lot of those.
No, I've been there too. Don't play well with others. I don't play well with others, it turns out. Or maybe they just don't play well with me, I don't know.
Yeah, I tend to prefer to work on my own, I must admit.
So, if you're talking about business, and one of the things we sort of talk about is if the business is losing money and they think they're going to scale and is going to solve their problem, what do you think the fundamentals of, like, at which point do you think you should be growing, and what reasons should you be growing for? Like, you're making a lot of money, that's obviously like your scenario, you make a lot of money, you think, oh, let's scale it, but other people scale for other reasons, right?
They do, absolutely. I mean, and some of them do it really well, but a lot of them are just onto the delusion it's the right thing to do. But I think there's also another problem here, which is that a lot of people now go into entrepreneurship without any previous knowledge of it. They're ideas people, which is great. And instantly, I was listening to your episode with Gene Grazia, which I absolutely loved. I think it's just amazing. But he was talking about how useless education was, and I was just sitting there with a huge grin on my face. But it certainly doesn't prepare you for entrepreneurship, that's for sure.
No.
And so we get these people who go out, they have this great idea, it could be very disruptive, very brilliant, and they start a business, and all is going fine. They've got high energy. They started off, it's starting to grow, but they decide that makes them a CEO. Mm-hmm. And I think that is often disaster. It's different from a person who's got lots of business experience behind them and starts a business. But newbies who decide to be a CEO can be another death to business, because it's a completely different skill set. And they haven't had the experience. They don't know what they're doing. They actually usually hate it, because creative people doing all that stuff with systems and everyday problems and everything else, they want to take a gun to their head and jump out a window, at the same time, rather than do it. And, yet again, it's this conviction that that's what we are, founder and CEO on the label. Whereas instead, if we could only say, you're a fantastic ideas person, build a business to a certain point, cash in on your brilliance, and go and enjoy yourself, and then come up with a different idea. That's a great thing to be. Why don't we do that? Why do we say, they've got to stick there and be the one that grows it to the next stage, when that's somebody's job to do? It's not really a founder's job.
And I think, I think the thing that I've discovered is you're either a gardener or you're a hunter.
Yes.
Right? And so you can't teach a hunter to be a gardener. Like, it doesn't work. And the same principle, you're trying to make a gardener be a hunter, and he ends up just stuffing it up. So I think if you understand whether you're going to grow a business or whether you're going to actually go out there and start a business, I think it's a very different mindset. I mean, I look at that Apple scenario where, Chief Steve Jobs came in, lost his job because of the same scenario. They thought he was too young to run the business, because the guy that took over didn't have any ideas. He kind of ran it like that, and then the new guy took over. And I was reading a book from Simon Sinek the other day, the Why, Why.
Yeah.
And it said that the person that follows that founder in those really big businesses should not come up with ideas of their own as such. They should be actually following on with the founder's concepts, right, for the next one or two CEOs. And you look at what's happened with Apple, he hasn't really come out with anything innovative, but what he's done is he's built on top of that existing business and grown it that way, rather than trying to get out in front and be another Steve Jobs, because that would have been a big mistake. No one would have liked that, for starters. And the profits they make are massive now. But it was just reading that book about the why, because they reckon that you start off with why, and eventually you get to the what, and then what you do, and eventually sometimes that why becomes so fuzzy that you don't even know why you're doing it anymore. You're just doing the what.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a different thing. I couldn't agree with you more, John. I think that's a really good example. And, the why people aren't cut out for long-term, doing the what. And of course, the other thing is we tend to, people with small businesses, as opposed to high growth entrepreneurial businesses, but, for relatively smaller ones, we tend to think they're going to be for life. And, I remember falling into this trap myself and sitting there in my office and saying to people, oh, they'll have to drag me out of here, and probably find me to tell them a door, one morning. And, and we don't do that with jobs anymore.
No.
We've learned that people who stay in jobs too long stagnate. They've got nowhere else to go, no fresh ideas. So why on earth are we thinking that it's a good idea with our businesses? It's crazy. People who work for corporations go off and take a nice little sabbatical and come back and usually think it's time to move on. But, at least they recognize it's time to break.
And I think maybe you've made too many promises you can't keep. I think in some respects as an entrepreneur, you've set up a business and you've made all these promises to people and you kind of got yourself stuck. And I've had this situation where people say to me, what if something happens to you? It's like, well, I'll give you a good example. What happens if something happens to Elon Musk? Do you think those businesses will survive him? They might, but I don't know whether, Tesla might, but I reckon SpaceX would just completely fall apart. Because... he can have thousands of employees, but the reality is you lose him, he's still the why guy. They haven't got to what. When it gets to a point where you can actually, they've got a whole operating system in terms of they're doing flights as a normal part of business, he could probably walk away from that business and do something else and be perfectly fine. But it doesn't matter how big your business is, if something happens to you, a lot of times that's the end of the business.
Very true, and I hadn't translated it right up the scale to Elon, but wow, it's exactly the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's the reality you got to think about, because I think the other thing, when I worked in the bank, I worked in the bank for about 12 years, and one of the things that I noticed was that people never think anything's going to end. Like when they sell their business, they'll sell their business for heaps of money, and they'll make all this money out of it. But typically they sell a business when they're sick, broke, or there's another big, like a divorce or something going on. They never sell their business at the best time. So they never had a plan to sell that business in the first place, or a plan to like for me, I'm creating a legacy business with my son. So I'm teaching him, and some of the questions you ask yourself in that scenario is, if I've got this product, could he even sell it in the future without me? No, he can't. So what have we got this product for? And you change your mindset thinking to think about, well, if this has got to be a sustainable, replicatable business that he can take over, not reinvent.
I so agree. And, I see it all the time with people who scale or try and scale and get stuck. And, then it gets to this stage of business earning you and they're miserable, but they think they're going to lose out if they sell. And so they're stuck there and it's going to be better tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. And all these situations. And the chances are they haven't really understood value properly, like we were talking about. They also haven't ever learned about buying and selling businesses. And in my experience, those people who maybe go to a party or network or whatever and say, oh, I'm fed up and, I've had enough of this business. I'm sure you probably find this too. There are people out there who get the message back to an awful lot of sharks. And the sharks start circulating and saying, oh, I hear you're having a miserable time and you'd like to get out. I could help you out by taking your perfectly good business off you for an absolute zero money. I'm doing you this huge favor. And you do, if you don't understand actually creating a valuable asset and you haven't got that mindset of building something that you could want to sell at any point, as you say, that something might happen, an illness, a divorce, or whatever, then you're so exposed to these people and all that hard work that you've poured in, all those hours that you've spent late nights are just gone for nothing.
Yeah, and there's nothing to show for it because it disappears. Like it's like everything else, right? You end up like I spoke to somebody the other day about this concept that LinkedIn's decided at some point there that they wanted to close my account. I got 26,000 connections and they sent me this email. Unfortunately, it was a template. It was a bit of a template email. They forgot to change some of the words. So I went backwards and forwards to them, and while I was doing that, they locked my account and they disappeared me. So 15 years or whatever of LinkedIn was gone. All my posts, all my messages, everything was gone. And I already know that this is what happens, but until it happens to you and you start thinking about it, you realise that all the work I just did on social media is gone. And I resigned myself 2 days later that I was never going to get that LinkedIn account back. So I just kept emailing and asking the question, you can't be serious. Why? You didn't even tell me why you're shutting this account down. And they kept sending me back emails, but they forgot to change the template. So they actually said, insert reason here. And so it's like, hang on, you don't even know why you banned me. So I'm going to keep pushing this. So in the end, I finally got to the point where they said, okay, we've decided to reinstate you. I said, okay. After saying that never again would I have an account. I said, exactly. And then they say, the reason why is because you were selling PPE and gloves and personal protection stuff. Okay, I never mentioned a single word about that. I have no idea where they got that from, but I think they forgot to change the template again. So I just let them go. So I'm not going to argue the point with you now. But the reality is their systems fell apart. I spoke to someone who eventually got me there, but that means that everything you've done is gone. And I've seen that I've been through several businesses where I've had to close them and take everything out of there and move premises and stuff like that. And it's a soul destroying exercise, I've got to tell you. But one of the things it does make you realise is that nothing's permanent. No matter what you do there, it's not permanent. It's like anything, just goes back to the soil, and you were never there.
It's so true. It's so true. And again, that's what we so need to recognise, I think, in business. And again, more short-term thinking, more creating a great asset, that you can change and get out of and move on to something else. Yeah. And be better off for it, not giving years of your life to something miserable.
Yeah, it makes sense. So, if you can turn it into something you can sell even if you don't want to sell it, but at least you've got a way out of it then, because things change for sure. And I think that's...
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, what do you think's the biggest thing that people should do when they're sort of looking at that situation, they're scaling their business? What do they should be aiming for? Like, should they be looking at a time scale of fast scaling or slow scaling? I mean, how do you think it sort of works?
It's an interesting question. I think it is somewhere in the middle, but it also depends on each sector. I mean, you get the big tech giants, or tech unicorns, should I say, really, like Monzo or Uber, who are going to have to get such enormous critical mass users that before they become profitable. I mean, then somebody like that has to go flat out for as fast as possible. And even then it's going to take a while. But for the average person, I think it's important to go forward with care and with preparation. Mm-hmm. I think, if you do your prep right for maybe 18 months, 2 years before you do it, then you can move forward pretty confidently and at a fair pace. But if you skip the prep, you're going to be in trouble.
And I think the other thing too is that what I used to do when I sell accounting software in a previous life, I used to ask the question, if your sales double tomorrow, could you cope with it? Because most people can't. Yeah. Right, they can't cope with that growth. Yet that's what they want to do. Every day they wake up and say, I need more sales, I want to double my sales. The reality is, if you double your sales, you probably can't sustain it anyway. If you can't, you can't take that additional work on, you'll end up, unhappy customers, and you won't be scaling, you'll be descaling.
Right? Exactly. And you rightly said earlier, it's so hard to go back, because, for so many reasons, you've taken on the extra overheads, or you've taken on extra people or whatever. And it's just viewed as disastrous, and it feels horrid. And, it's like stamping failure across your forehead.
It's quite interesting, actually, because I had a cold consulting division. We had 7 staff in that consulting division. We were selling accounting software. And one of the things that I was successful with my own business when I was doing consulting was I tracked my time and I got paid for my time. And what I realised was that I wasn't billing all my time. So when I actually started tracking it, so I forced myself, I was the only person in the business doing this work, but forced myself to track it, realised I was only billing about 40% of my time. So what I did is I increased my hourly rate by $15 an hour from 65 to 80, and I actually said I must bill out 80% of my time. So as soon as I did that, that turned another $100,000 a year in revenues. But the consulting guys would not play the game. So I kept on saying to these guys, if you don't get more billing hours and you bill your time and you do this, I'm going to fire you. And they thought I was kidding. So at one point there, I lined all 7 of them up and fired them one at a time. Because I said you're not, and that was because I couldn't decrease the size of the business. It wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
I had to shut it down, and the only way I had to shut it down was get rid of everyone.
Yeah.
And I said to them, I said, if you don't listen to what I'm saying, you're going to lose your job. And they're doing this for months. In the end, I said, okay, we're doing it. And the shock on their faces, right? But the reality was I had to make a decision because they were bleeding money. Like all they want to do is increase their wages and not do any work. And so it was like, oh, tell you what, rather than this commission on hourly hours, let's just increase my wage a bit and then, you can keep all the money. And what we realised, we got ourselves in a hole there. So we tried to scale that business by billing time. But then the people who were supposed to be billing time weren't billing time. They were just taking it easy.
Yeah, that must be. I have heard that one of that piece of advice somewhere. I'd forgotten it. So thank you for the reminder, of really calculating your own hours properly. Yeah, and it's very easy to forget, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you're worth something, right? You're worth so much an hour. And I think some people say to me, I want to make $1 million a year. Well, if you divide that by the number of hours a week you work, you have to get paid, I think, roughly $500 an hour from memory.
Yeah.
So if you're the only person working in the business, how are you ever going to do that? It's impossible. You can't work 300 hours a week, right? It's never going to work. So yeah, I think it's crazy to try and think you can do it that way.
I agree. And of course, that's another thing. Your inability to work 300 hours a week is another thing people get wrong when they start growing. Because, of course, we do all work terribly hard and very long hours when we're building a business initially. And, those are 3 hours in essence, all that overtime and late nights and what have you. And, when you double the size of it, there isn't a double you to do it. So, all those double 3 hours for are suddenly becoming very expensive double management hours on somebody else.
And I think what I started doing was I started saying that I don't work weekends for clients. So what I've done now is I'm come on Friday afternoon, that's it. No more work for the client. Unless it's urgent, something on the weekend. So I do whatever I want, whether I'm working on my own business or whether I'm not doing anything, because there's not 8 days in a week. So if you start working 7 days a week, you're doomed. You've got no breathing space and no time to think if you actually do that. So I think if you can't run a business 5 days a week, once it's, obviously in the startup stage, it's a different story, but once you get into a reasonable amount of money coming through, if you can't run that business 5 days a week, you're never going to run it 7 days a week.
That makes a lot of sense. I agree with you. And I know that, again, sort of for the book research, one of the most successful of all of the entrepreneurs I spoke to, and, to me, this was staggering revelation. But he told me when he was building this business, which he did super fast to a huge size and sold it very successfully, he actually worked school term times.
Right.
And because he wanted to be on peak performance all that time. And he wouldn't work weekends, wouldn't take calls from his team or anything else, and wouldn't let them either. And encourage them to be absolutely so peak when they were working and value that downtime. And that, I think, in this country, I think Australia is actually ahead of the game on work-life balance, gets a better result. But in this country, it's a really, really foreign concept.
Yeah, and I think it's dangerous because I think if you've got a tired worker, they're not going to give you the best result. And making them work longer hours is not like the old story is nothing gets done at work. No work doesn't get done at work. And we used to have the same situation where some of these kids would say to me, I want to stay home and work today because I'll get more done. And it's like, okay, so how much, and I figured out the average working time for most people was about 3 to 4 hours a day. That's about average what they work when you think about it. So now you want them to work a couple more hours a day, all they can do is drag it out. Your 8-hour day becomes a 10-hour day, and all you've done is just dragged the same thing out. You probably don't get any more out.
Yeah, I think I remember learning that the hard way. My son had a very brilliant friend. I mean, that's no reflection on my son, but at all, he was quite bright in his own right. But he had this very brilliant close chum who was also inherently lazy, as many very brilliant people are. And he came and worked for the summer for us. And I would give him a list to do of whatever needed doing for the day. He was very tech-minded and very able in very many ways. But, 9:30 or whatever, I'd go back into the office he'd be in, and there he'd be with his feet up and playing a computer game. And I'd go, what on earth's going on? I'm paying you, chum. And he'd go, no, Jan, you don't understand. You've given me 8 things to do today. That means I do 1 an hour. And therefore, the rest of my time is my own. I'm quite on schedule. So, I'm just playing this game, all right? I say, yeah. And of course, everybody else who wasn't as capable as him was struggling to keep up and was not able to put their feet up and play computer games. But actually, I think, again, we're learning to become more recognizing the value of tasks and achievement than we are of ours. And I think that's really vital.
Yeah, production or productivity, really, when it comes
to
just activity that looks like it's being busy. And so, yeah. So tell me a little bit about your book. So tell me about the book and what's happening there, because obviously we'll put up some links on the page so people can get it when they do listen to the podcast. But tell me a little bit about your book and what's going to be in it.
Well, my book is called Scale for Success. It came out of the struggles I had myself and the struggles I saw other entrepreneurs having with scaling. And I thought, now I had time on my hands, and I'd always wanted to do more writing because I was writing articles, but no, I'd never tackled a book. I will do some research and find out what I can put together in a way of practical help and advice for people who do want to scale and do it right, and alert them to pitfalls and give them help. And so I spoke to, as mentioned, I spoke to some very brilliant entrepreneurs right across the globe, some wonderful people in Australia, it must be said, and the States and England. And I put together their advice into a sort of guide, if you like. It's divided into sections with bits on finance and bits on sales and bits on marketing. So it takes you through the whole caboodle, but with these amazing entrepreneurs telling their stories, their experiences, and giving advice, and very honest advice. They talk wonderfully about their failures and successes and what's worked, and they're not puff pieces. They were great people to chat to, and they just contributed so much wisdom. I'm putting that together with my own experiences, and will hopefully make a really useful guide to people to be able to do it a little bit wiser. So there's a lot of wisdom in it, and I can't take very much credit for it because it comes from brilliant people who've helped me with it.
Yeah, but at least you got it out of them, right? Some people don't tell you stuff. You got to get it out of people sometimes.
True.
Most successful people don't necessarily want to tell you how to do it, right?
No, I've been very blessed. I mean, it took some while with research to get the right people, but I was very blessed with the people who came on board. They've been wonderful.
Excellent. Well, hopefully we can have a look at it when it comes out. That'd be great.
I hope so. Well, if anybody's interested, and meanwhile, they can leap on my website and they can download the first chapter for free. So have a little read and see whether it's for them. Hopefully it will be.
So what's the web address for that one?
It's www.jancavelle.co.uk.
Cool, no worries, and I'll put the links up on the podcast as well.
Thank you, John.
So we can do it. So I really appreciate your time. I think it's an interesting subject, scaling, and I think, as you say, it's a bit of a myth. People think that they've got to do it because the next door neighbour did it, but the reality is that not everybody can scale, and as you say, don't necessarily have to. There's other ways of doing it. So I really appreciate your time coming on, and I'll hope to talk to you again soon.
My pleasure, John. It's been lovely. Thank you.